I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly. Not for me, for yourself. When was the last time you sat down, completely alone, completely quiet, and looked at exactly where you stand financially? Not a quick glance at your account balance, not a rough estimate in your head, but a real, honest examination of where you are and where you are going. If your answer is months ago, or years ago, or never, then what I am about to share with you may be the most important 30 minutes you spend this year. Because there is a mistake, a specific, identifiable, deeply common mistake that is quietly being made by roughly 9 out of every 10 Americans over the age of 50. Not 9 out of 10 irresponsible people, not 9 out of 10 people who did not try. 9 out of 10 people who worked hard, stayed responsible, and genuinely believed they were doing the right things. And this mistake does not announce itself. It does not arrive with a warning. It accumulates silently, over years, sometimes over decades, until one day the person looks at their numbers and realizes the gap is larger than they thought, the time is shorter than they planned, and the approach they have been using was never designed to get them where they needed to go. If any part of that sounds familiar, stay with me, because today I am going to name the mistake clearly, and more importantly, I am going to show you exactly what to do instead.
Chapter 1. Naming the mistake. Let me name the mistake directly, because it has a name, and once you can name something, you can address it. The mistake is this: most Americans over 50 are managing their retirement as if they still have 30 years ahead of them. They are using strategies, timelines, assumptions, and behaviors that were designed for someone in their 20s and 30s. They are tolerating levels of risk that only make sense when you have decades to recover from losses. They are making financial decisions based on emotions and impulses that worked fine when time was abundant, but become extraordinarily expensive when time is limited. They are, in other words, playing a game that has already changed, with rules that no longer apply, and nobody told them. Not their bank, not their employer's retirement plan, not the financial media they consume. Nobody looked them in the eye and said, "The rules changed when you turned 50, and if you do not adjust your approach, you will pay a price that cannot be recovered." Let me explain exactly what I mean. When you are 25 or 30, investing is fundamentally a game of time. You have decades ahead of you. The market will go up and down, sometimes dramatically, but you have enough time that the downs barely matter. A 30% market drop when you are 28 is an inconvenience, a learning experience, maybe even an opportunity, because you have 30 years ahead of you to recover and then some. A 30% market drop when you are 58 is something completely different. It is not an inconvenience, it is a potential catastrophe, because the recovery that would have taken 2 or 3 years when you were young may now take 5 to 7 years. Years you do not have. Years you cannot afford to spend simply recovering ground you already covered. Here is the number that makes this concrete. The average American over 50 has lost, on average, between 3 and 7 years of effective retirement progress, not from bad intentions, but from applying young person's strategies to an older person's timeline. 3 to 7 years. Gone. not from a dramatic mistake, from a chronic, quiet, persistent mismatch between the strategy they were using and the stage of life they were actually in. That's the mistake. Not one decision, a chronic mismatch. And the first step to correcting it is simply seeing it clearly. I want to tell you about a woman I will call Sandra. Sandra was 57 years old. She had worked in healthcare administration for 26 years. She had contributed to her 401k consistently since her early 30s. She had done everything she was told to do. Contribute regularly, stay invested, do not panic. And for most of her investing life, that advice served her reasonably well. But Sandra had never adjusted her strategy as she aged. She was still invested the same way at 57 that she had been at 37. Same allocation, same risk tolerance, same assumptions about how much time she had to recover from setbacks. When the market dropped sharply, as it does periodically, as it always has and always will, Sandra lost 34% of her portfolio value in 14 months. At 37, that would have been painful but survivable. At 57, it meant her retirement timeline had to be pushed back by 4 years. 4 years of her life. Not because the market was unpredictable. The market is always unpredictable, that's not news, but because her strategy was not designed for her actual stage of life. It was designed for a version of her that no longer existed. And that distinction between having the right strategy in theory and having the right strategy for your actual situation right now is everything.
Chapter 2. The 3 versions of the mistake. Now I want to break this mistake down into its 3 most common forms. Because the mistake does not look the same for everyone. It appears in different shapes, different habits, different patterns. But underneath all of them is the same fundamental problem. A strategy built for someone younger being applied to a life that has moved beyond it. The first form. Too much risk for too little time. The first form of the mistake is carrying too much investment risk for the time you actually have remaining. Most people know, intellectually, that their portfolio should become more conservative as they age. But knowing something intellectually and actually doing it are 2 completely different things. Because adjusting your risk means accepting lower potential returns. And accepting lower potential returns when you feel behind feels like giving up. It feels like admitting defeat. It feels like choosing a slower path when you believe you need a faster one. So people resist the adjustment. They tell themselves they still have time. They tell themselves they can handle the volatility. They tell themselves one more good year in the market will make up for the ground they have lost. And then the market drops, and the cost of that decision becomes real, very quickly. Here is a simple way to think about appropriate risk after 50. Ask yourself this question. If my portfolio dropped 30% tomorrow and took 5 years to fully recover, would my retirement still be on track? If the answer is no, you are carrying more risk than your situation can absorb. And that is not a judgment, it is a calculation. And calculations, unlike feelings, can be adjusted. The second form of the mistake is the opposite of the first. It is being so afraid of risk that you move everything into cash, fixed deposits, or savings accounts, and then quietly watch inflation eat your purchasing power alive. Many people over 50 do this. They have been frightened by market drops. They have watched their portfolio fall and felt that specific kind of dread that comes from watching something you spent years building suddenly shrink. And so they pull back. They move to safety. They choose guaranteed low returns over uncertain higher ones. And on the surface, this feels responsible. It feels conservative. It feels like protecting what they have. But here's what they are actually doing.
They are trading visible risk for invisible risk. Because inflation is risk. It's just quiet risk. It's just risk that doesn't show up on a dashboard. It's just risk that accumulates so slowly that you don't notice it until suddenly everything costs significantly more than it used to. Healthcare, housing, food, utilities, travel. The costs of being alive in retirement do not stay still. They grow. And if your money is not growing at least as fast as those costs are rising, you are getting poorer in real terms every single year. Even if the number in your account stays the same, even if it grows slightly. If it does not grow fast enough, you are falling behind, silently, safely. And by the time it becomes visible, the options are limited. The third form of the mistake is the most common and the most costly. It is making financial decisions based on emotion and then finding rational-sounding explanations for those decisions afterward. It looks like this. The market drops. You feel afraid. You sell something or move something or stop contributing, and you tell yourself you did it because of a careful analysis of market conditions. But the truth is, you did it because you were scared. And scared is not a strategy. The market rises. Something has been going up for months. You feel like you are missing out. You buy something or increase your exposure to something at exactly the moment when it is most expensive. And you tell yourself you did it because of careful research. But the truth is, you did it because of fear of missing out. And fear of missing out is not a strategy either. This pattern, react, rationalize, repeat, is the single most expensive habit in personal investing. Not because any individual decision is necessarily catastrophic, but because the pattern, compounded over years, consistently produces below-average results. It produces buying high and selling low, which is the exact opposite of what builds wealth. The solution to all three forms of this mistake is the same. It is not a specific investment product. It is not a particular asset allocation. It is a system, a structure built specifically for the stage of life you are actually in, not the stage you were in 10 years ago, not the stage a 30-year-old is in, the stage you are in right now. And building that system, understanding what it looks like, what it includes, and why each part matters is exactly what the rest of this video is about.
Chapter 3. What the right approach actually looks like. Let me describe what a retirement strategy built specifically for someone over 50 actually looks like. Because it is different from what most people have, and the differences are not small. They are structural, they are fundamental, and once you see them, you cannot unsee them. The first difference, protection, comes before growth. When you were young, growth is the primary objective. You were trying to build the largest possible base of capital over the longest possible period of time. Risk is acceptable because time absorbs it. After 50, the primary objective shifts. Protection comes first, not instead of growth, before growth. The question changes from how much can I make to how much can I keep? From what is the maximum upside to what is the maximum damage I can absorb without derailing my retirement. This is not pessimism, this is precision, because the asymmetry of loss after 50 is real and important. A 50% loss requires a 100% gain just to break even, and the time required for that recovery may not be available to you. So the first structural difference in a post-50 retirement strategy is that every investment decision starts with a protection question. What happens if this goes wrong? Can I absorb that outcome without permanently damaging my timeline? If the answer is no, the investment is too risky, regardless of its potential upside. The second difference, income generation, becomes central. When you were young, you were accumulating, you were adding money in. After 50, and especially as you approach retirement, the strategy shifts toward distribution. You begin thinking not just about how large your portfolio can grow, but about how it will generate the income you need to live. This means the income-generating capacity of your portfolio becomes one of its most important features, not as an afterthought, not as something you will figure out later, as a central design principle right now. Dividends, bond income, real estate distributions, annuity-like structures, whatever form it takes for your specific situation, the question of how your money will eventually pay you a regular income needs to be built into your strategy today, not the year before you retire, today. Because building income-generating capacity takes time, and the people who wait until they are 63 to start thinking about this are almost always the people who end up working longer than they planned. The third difference, simplicity, becomes a competitive advantage. When you are young and have decades of time, you can afford complexity. You can afford to have many different positions, many different strategies, many different experiments running simultaneously, because time will eventually sort out what works and what does not. After 50, complexity is not a feature, it's a liability. Every additional position in your portfolio is an additional decision you have to make during a market drop. Every additional strategy is an additional opportunity for confusion, second-guessing, and emotional interference. Every additional layer of complexity reduces your ability to stay calm and consistent, which, as we have established, is the single most important behavior in late-stage wealth building. Simplicity is not the absence of sophistication. Simplicity is the achievement of clarity. Knowing exactly what you own, knowing exactly why you own it, knowing exactly what you will do under different conditions, and having so few moving parts that you can maintain that clarity without constant effort. That is the competitive advantage that most people over 50 never access because they've been told, incorrectly, that more complexity equals more sophisticated investing. It does not. More often than not, more complexity equals more confusion, equals more emotional decisions, equals worse outcomes. The fourth difference, time is managed differently. After 50, time is not an unlimited resource that you can count on to fix your mistakes. Time is a finite, precious, non-renewable input, and managing it well means something very specific in the context of investing. It means that every year you delay making the right adjustments costs you more than just 1 year. It costs you the compounding that year would have produced. It costs you the recovery time if something goes wrong. It costs you the income that properly structured investments would already be generating. The cost of delay after 50 is not linear, it's exponential. And that means the best time to make these adjustments, if you haven't already made them, is not next year. It's not when the market settles. It's not when you feel more ready. It's now.
Chapter 4. The Story of Two Adjustments. I want to show you two people who faced the same situation and made different choices, because the math of those choices is more powerful than any abstract principle I could describe. The first person is a man I will call Thomas. Thomas was 54 years old. He had $180,000 saved in a 401k that was still allocated the same way it had been when he was 40, mostly equity-heavy, aggressive growth funds, high volatility tolerance built for a younger man. Thomas knew, somewhere in the back of his mind, that he probably should adjust things, but the market had been performing well. His portfolio was growing. It felt like the wrong time to reduce his exposure, so he delayed. He told himself he would reassess at 56, then at 57, then at 58. In the meantime, he continued to let fear of missing out keep him in a portfolio designed for someone 15 years younger. At 59, the market experienced a significant correction.
Thomas lost 31% of his portfolio value, $55,800, gone in 11 months. He panicked and sold a large portion near the bottom, locking in his losses. By the time the market recovered, Thomas was now 61, with $142,000, and his retirement was not on track. The second person is a woman I will call Patricia. Patricia was also 54 years old. She also had approximately $180,000 saved. She also had an allocation that was more aggressive than it probably should have been for her age. But Patricia made one different decision. She sat down with her situation honestly at 54. She asked, "Is this portfolio built for who I am right now or for who I was at 40? The answer was uncomfortable. She made the adjustment. She shifted her allocation toward a more balanced structure, more income-generating assets, more stability. Controlled but not eliminated growth exposure. It felt slow. It felt boring. There were months when she watched aggressive growth funds do better than her portfolio and felt the pull of regret, but she stayed the course. When the same market correction hit, Patricia's portfolio dropped 12%, not nothing, but survivable. She did not panic. She did not sell. She rebalanced slightly and kept contributing. By the time the market recovered, Patricia had not missed the recovery because she had never left. At 61, Patricia had $224,000. Same starting point as Thomas, same market conditions, different outcome. Not because Patricia was smarter, not because she had access to better information, but because she made one adjustment at the right time and then had the discipline to stay with it. The difference between $142,000 and $224,000 is not a small difference. It is the difference between working until 68 and retiring at 65. It is the difference between financial anxiety and financial stability. It is the difference between spending your 60s worried about money and spending your 60s actually living. And it all came down to one decision made at 54 to look honestly at whether her strategy matched her actual situation, and then to adjust.
Chapter 5. The adjustment most people avoid. I want to talk about why people avoid making this adjustment, even when they know they should, even when the logic is clear, even when someone like me has just walked them through exactly what it costs to delay. Because understanding the logic of something and actually doing it are two entirely different experiences, and the gap between them is almost always emotional, not intellectual. The first reason people avoid the adjustment is inertia. The portfolio is set up a certain way. It has been that way for years. Changing it requires effort. It requires decisions. It requires confronting the fact that what you have been doing may not have been fully appropriate for some time, and inertia is a powerful force. It is so much easier to simply continue doing what you have been doing, especially when things have not obviously broken yet. The second reason is hope. People hold on to aggressive strategies because they hope the market will do one more strong year and close the gap they feel. They are waiting for a windfall, for the portfolio to do the heavy lifting that their savings rate could not. And that hope is not irrational. Sometimes the market does cooperate, but hope is not a strategy. And waiting for the market to solve your problem while you carry inappropriate risk is one of the most expensive forms of procrastination that exists. The third reason is pride. Reducing risk feels like admitting that you are getting older.
It feels like accepting limitations. It feels like moving from the aggressive table to the conservative table. And for many people, especially men in my experience, that feels like a loss of identity, a signal of decline rather than wisdom. But here's the reframe I want to offer. Adjusting your strategy as your timeline changes is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of intelligence. The most sophisticated investors in the world adjust their approach based on their actual situation, not based on what feels impressive, not based on what sounds aggressive, not based on what their younger self would have done, based on what their actual situation requires. That is wisdom, and wisdom after 50 is far more valuable than bravado. The fourth reason, and the most honest one, is that people are afraid of what they will find when they look. Adjusting your strategy requires first assessing your actual position. And assessing your actual position means sitting with numbers that may be uncomfortable, may be sobering, may require confronting a gap that feels too large to close. And that confrontation is hard. It is emotionally difficult in a way that most people underestimate. But I want to say this clearly. The discomfort of looking honestly at your situation is always smaller than the cost of not looking. Because not looking does not make the gap disappear. It just means you arrive at the gap later, with less time to do anything about it.
Chapter 6. The 4 adjustments that actually matter. Let me now give you 4 specific adjustments that make the biggest difference for people over 50 who are correcting their strategy. Not a list of 20 things, not a comprehensive financial plan. 4 adjustments. Because focus, after 50, is more valuable than comprehensiveness. Adjustment 1. Rebalance your risk profile. The first adjustment is to honestly assess and rebalance how much risk your portfolio is carrying. This does not mean moving everything to cash. It means asking, is the level of volatility in my current portfolio appropriate for my actual timeline? A simple starting framework. If you are 10 or more years from retirement, you can still afford meaningful growth exposure with appropriate diversification. If you are 5 to 10 years from retirement, your portfolio should be transitioning. Income generation and stability should be growing in proportion. If you are within 5 years of retirement, protection and income generation should be the dominant features of your strategy. Controlled growth is still present, but as a smaller component. These are not rigid rules. Your specific situation, your other income sources, your expenses, your health, all of these matter. But as a general framework for thinking about whether your current allocation matches your actual position, it is useful, and it costs you nothing to apply it to what you currently hold. Adjustment 2. Build your income layer now. The second adjustment is to begin deliberately building the income-generating layer of your portfolio, not when you retire, now. The earlier you build this layer, the more time the income-generating assets have to season, grow their distributions, and establish a reliable cash flow. Dividend-paying stocks that have insistently grown their dividends over time, bond allocations that generate regular interest, real estate investment trusts that distribute income quarterly. The specific vehicles matter less than the principle. The principle is begin building the part of your portfolio that will eventually pay you a regular income, and begin building it now, while you still have years for it to mature. Adjustment 3. Simplify your portfolio structure. The third adjustment is to simplify. Look at everything you currently hold, every fund, every position, every account, and ask honestly, do I understand what this is, why I own it, and what role it plays in my overall plan?
Anything you cannot answer clearly, examine carefully. Not necessarily to sell it, but to understand it. Because the things you hold without clear understanding are almost always the things that cause emotional decisions during volatility. When you do not understand something, uncertainty about it feels like risk, and that perceived risk during a market drop triggers the impulse to sell at the worst possible time. Clarity is protective, not just financially, psychologically. Adjustment 4. Create a written decision framework. The fourth adjustment is one that very few people do and that almost always produces a measurable improvement in long-term outcomes. Write down in plain language the rules that govern your financial behavior, not your investment strategy, your behavior. Under what conditions will you change your allocation? Under what conditions will you stop contributing temporarily? Under what conditions will you increase contributions? What market conditions do not justify any change at all? How often will you review your portfolio? When you have these rules written down, created in a calm, rational moment, you have something to refer to during the moments that are not calm. During the moments when the market is dropping and every instinct you have says to act. You have a document written by your better self for your worse self in exactly the moments when your worse self wants to take over. That document is worth more than most investment strategies, because strategy without behavioral governance almost never survives contact with reality.
Chapter 7. The conversation most people over 50 need to have. There is a conversation that most people over 50 need to have, and they keep postponing it, not with a financial advisor, not with their spouse, with themselves. The conversation goes something like this. Am I being honest about where I actually am, not where I hoped to be at this point, not where I assumed I would be? Where I actually am. What does the real number look like? Not the number I feel comfortable telling people at dinner, the real number. What is my actual monthly savings rate right now? Not the savings rate I intend to maintain, the one I actually maintain consistently. How much of my monthly income is going toward my future, and how much is going toward a lifestyle that has quietly expanded to absorb whatever is available? What would I need to change, specifically, concretely, starting this month, to close the gap between where I am and where I need to be? And am I actually willing to make those changes, or am I still hoping something will happen that makes the changes unnecessary? That last question is the most important one, because hope is not a retirement plan, and the people who spend their 50s hoping something will change without making the changes themselves are the people who arrive at 65 with a gap that cannot be closed. I am not saying this to be harsh. I am saying it because the alternative, the comfortable story, the soft reassurance, the "it will work out" narrative, has already cost too many people too much. You deserve the honest version, even when the honest version is uncomfortable, especially when it is uncomfortable, because uncomfortable truths faced directly create movement, and movement, compounded over years, create outcomes. Comfortable illusions, on the other hand, create nothing except regret. And regret, as we will discuss in a moment, is the most expensive thing a person can carry into retirement.
Chapter 8. The Cost of the Mistake in Real Terms. Let me put some concrete numbers on what this mistake actually costs, not hypothetically, in real terms. The average American who delays making appropriate portfolio adjustments after 50 by 5 years, just 5 years, loses on average somewhere between 15 and 25% of their final retirement portfolio value. Not from a crash, not from a single bad decision, from 5 years of carrying inappropriate risk, making emotionally reactive decisions, and missing the compounding that a properly structured portfolio would have generated during that same period. On a $200,000 portfolio, 20% is $40,000. That is not a small number. That is years of contributions. That is years of discipline. Gone. Not dramatically, quietly, through the compounding cost of misalignment between strategy and reality. Now let me show you the other side of that calculation. The person who makes the adjustments we have discussed at 52 rather than 57 generates on average 23 to 31% more retirement wealth by 65, on the same income with the same savings rate, simply because their strategy was matched to their actual situation for 5 more years. That is the math of this mistake. And those numbers are not cherry-picked. They are what consistently shows up when you compare the outcomes of people who adjusted at the right time versus those who delayed. 5 years, 23 to 31% difference in outcomes, on the same income, with the same effort, simply from making the right adjustments at the right time. That is what is at stake in this decision, and that is why I want you to take this video seriously. Not to frighten you, to mobilize you. Because the version of this story where you make the adjustments at 52 or 54 or even 58, that version is still available to you. The window has not closed, but it is narrowing, and every year of delay is a year of compounding you cannot get back.
Chapter 9. From Mistake to Momentum. I want to end this video differently from how I began it. I began by naming a mistake. I want to end by naming a possibility. Because the same clarity that makes the mistake visible also makes the correction possible. The same awareness that shows you where your strategy is misaligned also shows you exactly where to realign it. And realignment, even partial realignment, even imperfect realignment begun today, produces results that no amount of perfect planning begun tomorrow can replicate. Because the compounding that begins today is compounding that begins today. Not a simulated version, not a projected version. Real compounding, real interest, real growth, beginning from the moment you decide to begin. I have watched people in their mid-50s turn situations around they genuinely believed were beyond recovery. Not through luck, not through dramatic moves, through the 4 adjustments we discussed. Rebalancing their risk profile to match their actual timeline, beginning to build income-generating capacity intentionally, simplifying their portfolio until every part of it had a clear purpose, creating a written behavioral framework so their decisions in difficult moments were governed by their calm self rather than their frightened one. Those 4 adjustments, applied consistently over 5 to 10 years, produce outcomes that look, from the outside, like they required something extraordinary, but from the inside, they feel like exactly what they are. One reasonable decision made at the right time, followed by the discipline to stay with it. That is available to you right now. Not someday, not after the market settles, not after you feel more ready. Right now. The only question is whether you will take the first step today, or whether you will arrive at next year having spent this year the same way you spent last year. That choice is yours, and I genuinely hope you make it well.
If this video helped you see something you had not been willing to look at directly, that is exactly what it was designed to do. Not to frighten you, to clarify, because clarity is the beginning of every meaningful change. Share this with someone who needs it. The person in your life who is 50 or 55 or 58 and quietly carrying the weight of a strategy that was never designed for where they actually are. They may not ask for help directly, but they may need this. And the next video on this channel goes deeper into the specific structure, the 3-role system I mentioned today, and exactly how to build it for your specific situation, starting from wherever you are right now. It is already there. Go watch it. My name is the Legacy Investor. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next one.